Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Top 5 Recovery Strategies for Manufacturers in 2022, a webinar sponsored and presented by Ultra Consultants and Aptean. My name is Tim Green, and I'm the marketing manager for Ultra Consultants, and I'll be the host of this webinar. Before we get going, there are 3 things to know. Attendee phones will be muted for the duration of the presentation. Please feel free to send me a chat if you run into any technical difficulties during the event. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature. We'll address your questions during the Q&A segment at the end of the discussion. You can access both the chat and Q&A features of Zoom by placing your cursor over the bottom center of your webinar screen and clicking on the icons. Today's session will run for 45 minutes and end at 1:45 p.m. Central Time. We'll begin the webinar by introducing our presenters and with a brief overview of their companies and services. Then we'll move on to today's discussion on new and important research by Aptean on the ways manufacturers are adapting for the post-pandemic business environment, the strategies they say will be critical for recovery, and what it all means. Following the discussion, we'll preview additional resources we will provide to you in a follow-up email, which also will include a link to the webinar recording. Then we'll move on to Q&A for the remaining time. Today's presenters are experts in manufacturing technology solutions. Brantley Chavis is a veteran consultant with 10 years of manufacturing and supply chain experience and exceptional expertise in managing manufacturing and supply chain improvement projects. His background includes work in a variety of manufacturing verticals, as well as in the industrial, distribution, and retail sectors. Daniel Erickson has a broad business systems background and more than 20 years of experience that includes implementation, account management, product consulting, product management, and sales, all of which have helped him develop exceptional expertise in manufacturing solutions. Brantley and Daniel, thank you for being with us today. And with that, I'll hand it over to Daniel to give us a brief overview of Aptean.
Aptean is one of the world's leading providers of purpose-built, industry-specific software that helps manufacturers and distributors effectively run and grow their businesses. With both cloud and on-premise deployment options, Aptean's products, services, and unmatched expertise help businesses of all sizes to be ready for what's next now. Get future ready with Aptean ERP for manufacturing. From shop floor to delivery, our industry-designed manufacturing ERP software solutions deliver visibility, control, and efficiency. We can transform your operation through one of our 3 manufacturing ERP solutions: Aptean Industrial Manufacturing ERP, Aptean Process Manufacturing ERP, and Aptean Food and Beverage ERP. Please visit aptean.com for more information.
Thanks, Daniel. And now I'll tell you about Ultra Consultants. Ultra is an independent enterprise software consulting firm serving the manufacturing and distribution industries in North America and around the world. Leveraging our ERP and business process improvement expertise, industry experience, rigorous methodology, and today's best practices, we help organizations realize the bottom line benefits of modern enterprise technologies. Being independent means we use a neutral, fact-based structure to support the technology selection process and help our customers find the right solution for their industry, organization, and processes. And because we focus exclusively on manufacturing and distribution, we offer exceptional industry knowledge, nuanced insight, and a deep experience-based understanding of what's important and what isn't, and what works and what doesn't. To learn more about our business process improvement, technology selection, and technology implementation management services, go to ultraconsultants.com.
So as Tim mentioned, I'm Daniel Erickson, Senior Product Manager for Aptean. I have an extensive background in supply chain in manufacturing with over 22 years of experience in various industries and roles, with a focus on ERP and product management and strategy. My experience with customers in the field and knowledge of market trends and challenges has led me to deliver presentations through a number of forums like this one. It's been an unpredictable and difficult couple of years for the manufacturing sector. At Aptean, we wanted to understand how deeply the pandemic has impacted manufacturers and how quickly the sector is recovering, along with what is driving the return to prosperity among industry leaders. To do this, we surveyed 275 North American street and process manufacturers in conjunction with global research agency B2B International. And I'm really excited to be sharing some of our key findings with you today and what they mean for resilience and growth in manufacturing in 2022. So let's dive into the data. I want to reassure you that the manufacturing sector is on an upward swing. We can't escape the impact that COVID-19 had on manufacturing. Our research revealed that 30% of organizations lost customers during the pandemic, with a further 29% experienced a downturn in demand. That being said, many manufacturers are feeling confident that the worst is over, and after several months of increased output in 2021, we're going to see more growth opportunities in 2022. 78% of manufacturing businesses believe they're going to increase sales and revenue over the next 12 months. And hopefully your company is trending in a similar manner. However, what that increase looks like and how your business achieves it will depend on the position you're in right now. To benchmark manufacturers' recovery, we took their financial data from the past 2 years and their predictions for next year and used it to put organizations into 4 main categories: struggling, recovering, recovered, and prospering. Encouragingly, 4 in 10 manufacturers have already returned to a state of prosperity. And the majority of the businesses that haven't are either recovering from the impact of the pandemic or view themselves as fully recovered, which shows that many companies are in a position to focus on growth and innovation rather than just optimizing operations and managing costs to ensure they keep doing business. However, if we look at this data in a slightly different way, we can see that it's not an equal recovery story for all manufacturers. If we break down the data by business size, we can see that smaller manufacturers are much less likely to be prospering than enterprise organizations. The constraints of COVID-19 have been felt much harder by this group of manufacturers, as they don't typically have the customer diversity and operational agility to respond to never before seen setbacks like a global pandemic in the same way as larger manufacturers. And their service levels may have been compromised as a result, which has affected both their delivery capabilities and their customer relationships. If we cut the same data by business maturity, we see a similar story. Younger businesses are more likely to be struggling because they don't have the experience and resources to manage the impact of pandemic disruption. But what's really interesting to note in the survey data is that the most prosperous manufacturers have been in business between 6 and 20 years. Those over 20 years old are actually less likely to be prospering than young manufacturers. And this could be connected to older manufacturers' use of legacy systems and traditional ways of working. The pandemic pressured organizations in ways we've never seen before. And those who were able to adapt quickly could respond to what's happening in and around their manufacturing businesses and make strategic decisions based on real-world context. And achieving this level of agility and adaptability was dependent on having digitally transformative technology in place. I'd like to share now with you some insight we gained around where manufacturers are in their digital transformation journey. The majority of manufacturers surveyed are quite advanced in their strategy, with a quarter of organizations reporting that they've completed digital transformation and are now realizing the benefits. And if we cross-reference this information with our 4 stages of recovery and transformation, it shows us something compelling, which validates my comment a moment ago about whether use of legacy technology and processes has slowed the longest established manufacturers' return to recovery. There's a clear correlation here between manufacturers that have completed their digital transformation journey and those that are prospering. And the same can be said for those that are at stages 2, 3, and 4 in their digital transformation journey as well. Technology investment makes a noticeable difference to recovery and prosperity. At the other end of the scale, manufacturers with a non-existent digital transformation strategy are more likely to be struggling or in the process of recovering. So we can see clear case for investing in digital manufacturing software in order to accelerate recovery from the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. But where should organizations be looking to target their investment to enhance business growth? To understand this, I want to share with you some insights on the biggest challenges manufacturers are facing right now and how they propose using technology to solve them. I suspect many of you empathize with this challenge, as supply chain is the sector's most significant issue at the moment. A third of manufacturers we surveyed said that experiencing sourcing and upstream supply issues, while a further 28% are enduring downstream problems, which means that over 60% of manufacturers are currently troubled by their supply chain in some way. When we asked them what was causing these disruptions, we got a diverse range of answers, including price fluctuations, long lead times on materials, travel and transportation issues, and an over-reliance on one or more suppliers while lacking properly vetted alternatives. And while 7 in 10 manufacturers say the situation is improving, there's recognition that digital transformation and its integrated functionality is a key component to an improved supply chain if manufacturers want to avoid further disruption to material availability in the future. When we asked manufacturers how they were going to protect their business from future supply chain disruption, we saw the vast majority are either putting technology solutions in place already to address strategic pain points, or they are planning to within the next 12 months. And several of these solutions are designed to give manufacturers greater supply chain agility. For example, improving supply chain contingency planning, increasing supply chain visibility, and reducing risk by spreading orders across a wider number of suppliers. Many manufacturers are also focused on greater integration between material availability and production scheduling, which I now want to talk about in greater detail. Which brings me to challenge 2. Inevitably, supply chain challenges will impact materials management. And as a result, we're seeing many manufacturers being challenged by inventory control. A third of manufacturers are struggling to manage inventory levels effectively at the moment. And interestingly, these problems aren't just centered around keeping up with orders. 28% of organizations can't easily increase capacity to meet demand. So inventory control is just as big a challenge for prospering manufacturers as it is for those who are struggling or recovering. And the heart of the problem is data accuracy and visibility. A quarter of the manufacturers we spoke to said they can't update or align their production schedules with material availability. And it's no wonder if we look at companies' wider insight capabilities. "65% of manufacturers have significant gaps in their business data, and 54% don't trust the accuracy of their business information. So how are they planning to increase the quality and efficiency of their data delivery?" Returning to the statistics I shared a moment ago, we can see that several solutions organizations are already investing in or plan to in 2022 relate to inventory control and data management. Manufacturers are concentrating on aligning future workload with material requirement planning for improved inventory coordination. It's interesting to note from this table that 84% of manufacturers are already focused or planning to focus on improving production scheduling, to make smarter use of inventory. This shows that companies aren't just looking at more cohesive, data-driven approach to inventory control. They're putting the software in place to best manage changes and setbacks and minimize the impact of material availability or lack thereof on overall business performance. However, it's not just inventory that needs to be optimized. Which brings us to challenge 3. Another key challenge our research revealed manufacturers are experiencing is resourcing, finding the right number of people with the right skills for the job. Even before the pandemic, manufacturing was headed towards a recruitment crisis, with many skilled professionals aging out of the industry and organizations struggling to replace them. The Institute for Manufacturing predicts that over 3.5 million jobs will need to be filled in the manufacturing sector over the next 10 years, and our research supports this. 30% of the manufacturers we spoke to are short-staffed at this very moment, and the issue doesn't end there. Even in fully resourced companies, there is still a skills recruitment challenge. 4 in 10 manufacturers are currently reporting a skills shortage as their digital transformation journey shifts the capabilities required to deliver business value. But while digital transformation is creating skills-based challenges, it will also play a key role in overcoming the recruitment crisis, helping employees to deliver greater value, enhancing their natural talent, and automating processes so that manufacturing organizations can continue to run efficiently, even when people are in short supply. "66% of the manufacturers we surveyed believe technology will improve employee retention. And here are the areas in which they are interested in making digital investments. The most popular initiatives are focused on reinforcing the value of manufacturing workers. For example, preventing knowledge loss and improving training, although this is a more dominant objective among discrete manufacturers than process manufacturers. Technology will also encourage workforce flexibility, as more than 80% of manufacturers want to be using less rigid job descriptions by the end of next year. Our research clearly shows that digital transformation will empower people in manufacturing, improving their productivity and helping employees to collaborate while using technology to take over high risk or low value tasks. And now let's talk about the final major challenge manufacturers are facing. At the start of this webinar, I spoke to you about the impact the pandemic has made on customer orders, with many manufacturers experience a reduction in demand. Well, some of these losses were unavoidable. For example, because a customer went out of business, there are other customer service issues that have developed from the operational challenges manufacturers are facing. For instance, many manufacturers have been forced to create a customer hierarchy during the pandemic when material supplies have run low. 83% of manufacturers have delayed orders to prioritize higher value customers, and 72% have canceled orders completely. In the height of the pandemic, customers may have cut manufacturers some slack if their order was delayed or canceled because they understood we are all working under difficult circumstances. But as we've seen, most manufacturing organizations now rate themselves as recovered or prospering, which means there's less excuses for poor customer service levels. When we look across the business areas where manufacturers believe technology can add the greatest value, improving customer satisfaction is right at the top, with 69% of companies marking investment in this area as extremely important. 98% if we include those who view it as somewhat important as well. This is because the customer is at the core of every business decision, and digital transformation across the manufacturing organization has the power to elevate your customer experience. Digitizing and integrating systems will enable manufacturers to generate accurate real-time data insights, which can be used to enhance customer service capabilities, because it becomes easy to see how one change or setback affects a wider delivery capabilities. For example, if a shipment of materials is delayed, manufacturers can see exactly which customer orders are affected and start looking at which alternative suppliers can replace that order within the required lead time. And while they're waiting for those materials to be delivered, they can resequence production to continue producing orders with available inventory to limit the overall impact on productivity and profitability. If this proactive mindset that will allow manufacturing businesses to truly recover and prosper post-pandemic, because keeping customer promises increases their satisfaction levels, which means they're more likely to reorder, increase the value of their order as business conditions return to pre-pandemic levels, and refer their manufacturing partner to other companies. The research Aptean has conducted has given us clear reason for optimism as we move forward from the pandemic and shown the direct correlation between digital transformation and business prosperity. But digital transformation isn't a guaranteed fast track from recovery to resilience. Manufacturers need to think carefully about the roadmap in place. Whether you're struggling, in recovery, recovered, or prospering right now, I want to offer you the same piece of advice. Create a cohesive strategy for technology investment. With so many business areas to optimize, it would be easy to onboard multiple systems that solve specific issues. But this creates a new level of technical complexity, which need to be managed. That's more data to integrate, more systems to manage and maintain, and more programs to learn and train people on. Investing fewer, more sophisticated manufacturing-specific technologies, like manufacturing ERP software, will deliver the broad benefits you need to improve customer satisfaction and drive business growth, at the same time as enhancing individual business areas. And it will also give you the agility and resilience to respond quickly to future market changes, even ones as unpredictable and disruptive as COVID-19. We're coming to the end of this part of the presentation, so I want to summarize the key takeaways from our research among discrete and process manufacturers. Heading into 2022, the mood is optimistic, with most manufacturers now in a good place as we move forward from the pandemic. And we've seen that the differentiator between those manufacturers who are struggling and those who are recovered and prospering is the maturity of their digital transformation. Technology is enabling companies to recover quicker. However, there are still some major operational issues that are impacting manufacturers' abilities to deliver on the customer expectations. And solving these problems needs to be prioritized in organizations' digital transformation strategies. The most effective solutions will be delivered by comprehensive software that can unite and drive the end-to-end business, like manufacturing ERP. It's so much simpler and probably more cost-effective for manufacturers to invest in one piece of software to make business-wide improvements than put a system in place to address every operational bottleneck. Because those systems need to be integrated and used holistically to generate meaningful data extraction and decision making. But what does this mean for senior executives in the manufacturing industry? I'd like to round up today's session by sharing some recommended action. First, prioritize your data. Giving everyone in your company access to accurate real-time information is critical to effective decision-making. You can't effectively change what you can't see. Second, respond strategically to what that data is telling you to create change in the areas where it's needed most. So don't feel you need to change everything at once. The tallest skyscrapers are built one brick at a time. So focus on making improvements step by step. Third, make sure you have clear metrics in place which can benchmark your success. As I said earlier in the webinar, it's all about the customer ultimately. The greatest indicator of success is whether they are satisfied and continuing to do business with you. And finally, think carefully about the ERP software you're putting in place. I've talked about the broad benefits that enterprise planning technology offers, but you need to be careful that the solution you choose isn't too generic. Look for an ERP solution that's been designed with the needs of manufacturers in mind. This will strike the balance between offering end-to-end optimization while still delivering the specific functionality you need to manage each business area effectively. Now let's talk about the top 5 recovery strategies. Number 1, increasing sales revenue. 2, improving profit margin. 3, controlling or decreasing costs. 4, forecasting cash flow. And 5, managing or reducing debt. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. And if you're interested in learning more about the benefits of ERP software, Aptean offers 3 manufacturing ERP solutions, one for industrial manufacturers, one for process manufacturers, and one for food and beverage manufacturers. Our email address is on the screen if you have any questions, or if you'd like to book a free Aptean manufacturing demo. And that brings us to the end of this portion of the presentation. We can move into the next portion. Thank you as we continue.
Thank you, Daniel. As you said, it's time for the discussion. As Aptean found, and Daniel just said, the manufacturing industry, after nearly 2 years of turbulence, is looking to rebuild and restabilize in 2022. Let's talk about what that means. And I think we should start with the big important question. Today, and Daniel, you touched on this, what separates struggling manufacturers from prospering manufacturers?
Yeah, it's a great question and great for discussion. And I think as we've talked about through the presentation, but I'll bring a more point in here. Companies that were able to react quickly and pivot their business prospered. And that means something different to each of these businesses, right? But modern integrated software was key to this ability to pivot to a remote workforce and to handle change management with the shifting customer demand or temporary product line shutdowns, supplier disruptions, et cetera. As you have that central brain, that system in place, that's why those companies were able to pivot. So that brought that together. That ability to be able to quickly respond to that and do that through a centralized framework was key.
So I think we can all agree that supply chains are broken and maybe fundamentally changed for the long term. What is the ongoing impact of squeezed supply chains on manufacturers?
Yeah, if we look at the supply chain globally, which we all have to these days, and many of us do just as a business practice, you look at the globalization, a shift to reshoring. Those are all great topics. But one of the things that I focus on, and I mentioned in the presentation, was your vetted supply chain suppliers, right? So if I talk about you have a main supplier that you relied on for years, and suddenly that's disruptive. If you did not have a tiered approach to that supply chain, you're at great risk. You were at great risk during the pandemic. You were quite frankly, at great risk pre-pandemic. You just were managing. Now coming out of this, and with the current supply chain issues, if you haven't shored that up and vetted that, dug deep into the supply chain, built that tiered approach, you're still going to have some issues in 2022. So that's extremely critical, is making sure that you're maintaining that tiered relationships of suppliers and the ability to understand how they can respond and supply your business. And I think the other piece to that is when you look at those suppliers, one of the challenges, depending on what type of industry you're in, is regulation, right? So if I look at the material that I'm producing, as we talk about that customer's key, and if because I've got supply chain issues and I haven't well vetted those suppliers, that could have an impact on the quality consistency of the product that I'm shipping, and that also is going to have an impact on that customer relationship. It wasn't something that came out through the presentation, but we know that's the practical reality. If I'm getting inconsistent materials indoor because I don't have a well-vetted supply chain, that's going to affect the consistency of the product outdoor. That could lead to some of those delays as I have to recover and rework and do things based on those materials. So making sure that not only is it vetted, but you've got your certification, your quality understood on those products that are going to be supplied to you is extremely critical. As you may have to shift in and out of different suppliers to try and meet those timelines. Also, as you shift, from a global to a regional or a local supplier, those are the things that you have to keep in mind. Is you really want to make sure that you're still maintaining that quality consistency out the door.
So let's go back to workforce issues. How important is workforce management and skill building now and in the future?
As I mentioned during the presentation, and the research sure pointed us this way as well, many of the companies are being forced to do more with less from a labor force perspective. This means digitizing processes and implementing integrated systems to support the efficiency of the system and the employee base is critical. So this is impactful in a couple of different ways. Number one, it's impactful for the people that are able to work remotely. Not all of the labor force can, right? We still need people to produce product, and those people need to be on site. So you have the fact that we need to optimize that remote workforce and give them the tools to be effective, make sure that they have the ability to have good communication and collaboration because they're maybe not in office or we have a hybrid approach. But then also on the floor, we need to be able to empower the people that are there physically on the floor with good information as well, where they can no longer walk into a cube and get that data through an over-the-wall conversation. We may need to make sure that that's all centralized in a system so they can go access it from that centralized hub that we're all working from in this new world. And then as well with that workforce, being able to automate the things that are mundane to that task, right? So that the software can take over that task, not because we're trying to replace that work, quite frankly, but because we're really trying to make sure that that human element can truly come into play so they can manage the anomalies, they can manage the changes, the things that they are best at. And that's what came out in that survey. We need to make sure that software can handle some of those mundane tasks, digitize those so that the human element can be used most effectively.
Sure. I think we may have Brantley back. We're having some technical difficulties.
I'm back. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you. Well, we just handled the workforce question. Will workforce management, how important is workforce management and skill building now and in the future? I know you had some thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's definitely been a large challenge for some of the folks that I've dealt with, both hourly and exempt individuals working remotely, closing the books remotely. It's ebbed and flowed across finance and human resources, operations, supply chain on a daily and a weekly basis. And as what I'm seeing today, some jobs can remain remote, of which we're seeing, but some certainly will have to be brought back into the building. And having some of these companies, they want the folks back into the office because they like the camaraderie. They like the random meetings, the team dynamics. They feel like they're missing some of that. So this is definitely going to ebb and flow as we move into the future.
All right, excellent. So the last question is this: how can technology enable manufacturers to move from recovery to resilience? We talked about that a little bit, but I'd like to explore it and get both your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it obviously it's a common theme because it's so critical to these businesses prospering, right? We need to have that central hub, as I talked about, so that modern integrated system, that ability to have that central hub of information that can be managed from a distributed workforce. That's so critical today. It was already becoming critical as we pre-pandemic. Many companies were focused on that for years. We know that, but it really shined the spotlight on having that centralized repository for information. That's key, so that all the staff, wherever they're working from, what time of day they're working from, we all can work from that single system of truth and manage from that. We talk about that's how we are able to support real-time data management. That's how we're able to get reporting. We're able to build in the production schedule, the material availability. It's so critical that we're seeing all that information real time rather than having that information live somewhere in a static world until somebody updates it. That's become extremely critical in today's disrupted world.
Daniel, that's a very good point. And having an integrated supply chain, being nimble, being able to pivot quickly, and knowing and having instant access to your vendors and suppliers, your customers as well, has allowed many companies to react much more quickly than they have with antiquated systems. Vendor relationships. I was dealing with a customer in Chicago several weeks ago, and they had most of their suppliers' phone numbers and contact information on the back of a 3x5 note card. Some of the folks were using an old Rolodex system. So getting them and getting that information into a new ERP where everyone has access to the same information is definitely something that has to happen in the future.
Absolutely, Brantley. And it's a great point, right? Because that 3x5 card lives somewhere. And during the pandemic, who has access to it? Who gets in? Who can get into the office where that card lives, right? That's why I talk about static data. And that's just one very minute example, but we can understand the impact. If I have to somehow try and track down that information, the time loss, did I contact the right person? Even calling, if I remember the name of the supplier, who's my contact there? If somebody like Cargill, how do I even get to the right person? Or another large supplier. Those little bits of information, not in a centralized repository, are key. And you add those types of things up. That's where you can look at delays that you can really rectify with some modern technology.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Brantley and Daniel. We're going to move on to the Q&A. We might have a minute or two in just a moment. There is still time to submit questions. If you have questions, you can access the Q&A feature of Zoom by hovering your cursor over the bottom center of your webinar screen and clicking on the Q&A icon. As promised, we'll be sharing additional resources with all attendees in a follow-up email tomorrow. The webinar recording, links to 2 brand new blogs by Daniel on choosing the right ERP for process manufacturing, and our ebook, Building the Business Case for Your ERP. All right, let's see what we've got here. All right, here's a question. You've offered a number of solutions and strategies. We have limited resources and budget. Which 1 or 2 should be prioritized?
Yeah, that's if that's not the question on your mind, it should be, right? So great question, whoever submitted that. And of course the answer is different per organization. So I would bring that back to taking a look across your business, right? So whether digital transformation, we talk about these things, but you need to look at what's most critical to the business now, because every one of you is somewhere different in this journey, have different systems in place. You have different issues with the supply chain based on where you were getting that supply and what the current disruption is, the size of company you are. So what it really comes back to is identifying that the top 5 critical areas, and starting that step-by-step process I mentioned. So the key is understanding what the critical impacts are and executing down that list, rather than one area that I can give you, because for every business, of course, it's going to be different. But you have to make sure that you're doing that self-assessment, putting that list together and forming an action plan. To me, that's the most critical piece to do.
Brantley?
Yeah, I mean, those are some very good points. I mean, some of the more recent examples that I have, and certainly some of the folks that I have been dealing with more recently, have really been focusing on their supply chain. I mean, and we have a global supply chain, there's global supply chain issues, but they have been looking at, hey, how do I find and resurrect or continue building relationships locally, stateside, U.S. side, with more local U.S. suppliers that can handle their volume and certainly get them through, the next several months, or certainly through the next several years, of the supply chain issues that they're having. So that's what I have been focused on. That's what I've been working with my clients on. And they have, the ones that have been nimble have been able to move very quickly. And the ones that are not, they're still struggling.
All right.
Absolutely correct. I think it's great. And I'll just take that one step further, right? So you talk about focusing on supply chain. For a company that's mature in their digital transformation strategy, they may already have centralized those suppliers. They maybe have multi-tiered suppliers built into their systems. But now it's time to, now what they may need to identify is they need to make sure that they're doing a risk assessment periodically with that list, right? So now that you've got that in place, are you revisiting that list to make sure that that's still a valid supplier? 3 months from now, every 6 months, have you built the system in place to make sure that you're maintaining that list, right? That's somebody who's on the mature side. Somebody in the beginning of that maybe just hearing the multi-tiered approach for the first time, their most critical issue may be building out that list, making sure that they're well vetted from a supply chain issue, making sure that they're putting that information outside of that 3x5 system you mentioned, right? So very, very different interpretations of the same issue. And that's where each organization has to look at that and start executing.
All right, we're going to finish up. We have time for one quick question and quick answers. Do you think manufacturing will stabilize in 2022, or is it going to take longer? Daniel, you go first.
Yeah, I think all the indications from the research are that it is. I mean, I know that we're all aware of the news and the things that are happening, but we're also savvy veterans of the pandemic at this point, and I think everybody learned how to be creative over the last number of months, and that knowledge, that veteran leadership will help us stabilize through whatever's coming in 2022. So absolutely, I think we'll see a much more stable 2022.
Yeah, and some very good points there. I think some businesses will stabilize a lot sooner than others. Some of the ones that I've worked with, they're like I said, they're still struggling, but they see a light at the end of the tunnel. The horizon has gotten a little bit closer. They found some good stateside suppliers. They're moving forward, but still there's some uncertainty out there, of course. But they do believe that in 2022 things will get better.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brentley. And I think one thing to add to that, stabilization could mean that you've pivoted the business. You no longer producing a number of product lines too. That's still a form of stability, right? You recognize that the disruption in supply chain, that risk was too great for you, and you needed to pivot the business to work in a different area of expertise, because that's helped stabilize the business, so you reduce your risk. So there's many versions of what stable means in 2022. Right? Because I think we understand business as usual likely isn't the case.
Very good points.
All right, thank you, Brantley and Daniel. That concludes today's webinar for all of us at Ultra and Aptean, and for Brantley Chavis and Daniel Erickson. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you again at our next webinar.